I'm just going to talk a little bit about the basic kind of underpinnings of inventory management. Something that was sort of news to me when I realized this is that the failure to manage inventory is the #1 reason that seed businesses fail, both in the conventional sector and also in the organic sector. So this is across the board. Cash is what is tied up in inventory. So even if you're a profitable business on paper, if you don't have cash flow at the end of the day to pay your employees or to pay yourself, that is where your inventory is failing you, because your inventory is where your cash sits. You don't get paid until you move that inventory off your shelf or out of your barn or wherever you keep it. So really, business success depends on being able to manage inventory. And there are sort of differences between mission-driven seed businesses and livelihood-driven seed businesses. And those two things, I think, a lot of times struggle to compete in our businesses. A lot of times, you may be a mission-driven business, but that has a lot of varieties, but a few varieties might actually serve your livelihood better. So a few really good varieties that move off of your shelves quickly can be something that funds that cash flow and keeps it coming. And I'm not saying that you should be one or the other. I think that these two things can live in harmony. You can be a mission-driven business that also has a good livelihood. And the way that that has to happen is that you have to be making choices about your inventory consciously. So there are different types of seed businesses, wholesale, direct-to-grower, packeted seed businesses, sort of retail businesses. And then there are also, within those two types of businesses or models, there are also stewarded varieties that you might be really attached to, that your inventory is going to be managed a little bit different. And all of those things can live within your personal business, but they need to be managed differently and managed consciously so that you know why you're making the choices you are with your inventory. Wholesale and retail business choices are going to be talked about later by some of our expert farmers here. So I'm just going to leave that to them. I'm going to talk a little bit, just tiny bit, about stewarded varieties. Oh, you know what? These are the things I'm kind of skipping through. With stewarded varieties, sales may not be the end all. You know, you may not be deciding to drop a variety that you really believe is an important variety, but remember that it still is costing you money to grow it, to store it, all of those things. So in that case, pricing that variety can be really difficult, but it's going to be very important. And having to drop one of those varieties can be really emotional. I think, you know, having to make that decision can be a really hard one. So consider other options. I know that there are a lot of organizations that will take donated seed or things like that if you have a variety that you know you have to pass on. And there's going to be more information also about why companies decide to drop varieties and things like that in a later session during the conference as well. So if you're particularly interested in this, definitely go to that session. The things you need to know to be able to make inventory decisions are really which varieties are making you the best profit. And this entire day is sort of geared toward trying to suss that out, trying to figure out where your costs are going and what kinds of decisions you are going to have to make sure that you are making a good profit margin on varieties that you're carrying. Inventory costs money to maintain. You have to test germination, you have to ensure seed quality, all of those things. You have to protect it from rodents, from insects, all of those things, and that costs money. Storing it in a dehumidified facility is costing you overhead. So those are things to think about. The other thing that you really need to know is how well you expect the variety to sell next year. So a lot of what we're doing today with enterprise budgeting is sort of taking a snapshot and saying, like, this year, this is what things look like. So the question then becomes, what about next year? What does the next year look like, and how can we start making those decisions? We are not going to really get into financial forecasting today, but that's something that I know folks are really interested in, and hopefully we'll be able to get into that more in the future. But today we are going to really focus on sort of the snapshot that can still, if you don't expect much fluctuation year to year, you can certainly use last year's data to inform where you're going with this. One thing that I think is really important is to think of your entire catalog as an open pollinated variety. You want to keep the best, most unique varieties. You want to keep those things that really do drive your mission, but you also have to rogue varieties that do not serve your livelihood and do not serve your mission, or that are really dragging you down. So I think most of you are probably familiar with roguing, and I think this is a really good way to think about how to manage your catalog and your inventory. I'm going to talk a little bit now about kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of some inventory management strategies. And one of those is producing for your business a variety life cycle, or just a way of organizing how your varieties are seen within your business. And one of those things is that everyone in your organization needs to understand your life cycle system. So whatever it is, simple is usually the best, but every variety needs to be labeled this way, and it's really a great idea for everyone in your organization to know what these mean. This is an example that was given at the UC Davis Seed Business School of a variety life cycle. So I'm just going to quickly run through it. I know it's a little bit boring to look at, but I think it's important to see. Stat is 0, so any variety in your inventory that has a 0 on it is still in the research, would still be in the research stage, maybe breeding. You might have some variety trials out, and your business might be different. Maybe you don't do breeding, and so this wouldn't be something that is even in your variety life cycle. Development 1, finished varieties that are maybe being externally trialed by someone that you really trust, by farmers that you work with a lot, by yourself. This would certainly be if you're running a business that has, a normal variety trialing system. Maybe you have a little research area. This is where development 1 varieties would be. Development 2, you're producing foundation seed. Stock seed is available, and stock seed is available at a level where you're able to give maybe donated seed so that folks are doing widespread trials, but it's not available commercially yet. At stage 3, that would be an introduction stage. You would have a named variety, you would have prices. You might still be giving some samples, but you would also be taking sales of that variety. Stage 4, you have a new product. This is like the first couple of years where you're really trying to establish a market if this is a variety that you really believe in. So this is where you're establishing your market. Your budget is changing here a little bit. You're no longer in the production phase as much. You're really trying to push sales at this point. Stage 5, increasing sales. You're expecting growth. Stage 6, stable sales. Stage 7, you have declining sales. So this is where a variety starts. Maybe something new is on the market that's better. Maybe it's your next variety, right? So you can have a variety that's in declining sales with another one that's in increasing sales coming right behind it. Stage 8 would be phasing out. You're not doing any more production. You're selling whatever remaining inventory you can. And then stage 9 would be deactivation. And this would be where you're removing some of the remaining inventory and stock seed. You might keep the foundation seed here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you would keep foundation seed for anything that you might use as a parent in a new population or in a new variety, and you would keep foundation seed of anything that you think might be revived. So this all seems kind of crazy, but a life cycle of a variety, you might be in stable sales for 20 years. And it might stay there, for almost your entire career until you're deciding you're going to retire and not do this anymore, right? So I'm not saying all of this takes 5 years and we're going to be replacing varieties left and right. That's not the point. The point is that you're managing these in a little bit different way, depending on your bottom line. So keeping varieties that don't sell ties up your resources. So if you don't know which varieties are selling and you're keeping varieties around in your inventory that aren't selling, what are you missing out on? You're missing out on developing new varieties, on marketing your good varieties, and you're missing out on meeting your bottom line. So these are things to consider that I think are really important. And it goes back to that idea of roguing. You want to make sure that your entire catalog is as good as it can be, and it can be an emotional thing to have to think about deactivating a variety that you really believe in, but that isn't working for anybody else. So the question, and that is a business decision that only you all can make. That comes down to what you think is working for your business. The nice thing about knowing this variety life cycle is that within your business, there are specific responsibilities for everyone, right? So if you're managing it such that you're in stage 4 where like the variety is doing really well, then you have somebody who's responsible for forecasting that and for knowing, like, are we moving into stable sales, or are we still forecasting that this is going to be growing and we're going to need to produce more? And that helps inform your production. So within your business, depending on how it's structured, every level will have responsibilities based on forecasting, production, trialing, and budgeting. So whoever is doing the budget might be the one that is assigning those responsibilities. I'm going to talk a little bit about types of inventory because I know that this gets kind of fuzzy for folks. Foundation seed is breeder seed. So this is the seed that you are probably producing in really small lots. Stock seed is seed that you are producing to make production seed. So this is your best seed. And production seed is what you're going to be selling. Okay, and sometimes these two things overlap. So you might have a production field and you might be taking this corn variety that we see, you might be choosing the very best ears out of this production field and keeping that as your stock seed. That's one way that you might have an overlap in some of these. Here's just a little bit more information about that. So with foundation seed, these are really small amounts and small lots, and those usually should be kept different from your production or stock seed. Breeder seed, the breeder will have sort of a strange numbering system or something like that might not fit into the rest of your inventory, and it can get really muddled if you don't have those two things, if you don't keep them a little bit separate. One way to make sure that they stay separate is, of course, by having them labeled wherever they are as stage 0 in your variety life cycle. So anywhere you see breeder seed, it would have that stage 0. Stock seed, you want to, most of the time, you don't want to have to be producing stock seed every year. You want to be able to have enough stock seed to go back to for 2 or more years, depending on the quality of your seed and how well you can store it and how well that germination is going to be preserved. So if you have a really good storage facility, you could produce stock seed and then have enough stock seed to produce for 5 years if you're going to have the good germination for that long. This is, of course, as I said, the highest quality, best seed that you can produce. That's the goal of stock seed. This isn't the seed that you have in the back of your field, in the weediest part, in the corner that you neglected. The stock seed is the thing that it's your gold. That is where all of your production seed is going to come out of. This is where you go back to each year and you take that seed to make your production seed. Oops, wrong way. So production seed, of course, is for sale. And that's the important thing about all production seed, right? It has to be able to be sold. So each lot generally will have a unique designation. It should have that. If it doesn't, you can get mixtures. You might have 2 varieties that get mixed. You might have 2 fields that had different germination rates get mixed. All kinds of problems happen if each lot, which means each field, each harvest is a single lot. Those should never be bulked. They should never be mixed. They should always be kept separate. How much you're producing depends on how much you plan to sell, right? Which makes sense. And all of this also has to be managed for germination, purity, disease, all of those things. So these are just a couple of examples of what an inventory sheet might look like. Whatever you decide to do for your lot number is going to be something that you just decide on internally. You might have something that includes the variety, includes the year, the location, all of those kinds of things as your lot number, but those can get very long. So a lot of times you might just have a unique number for each lot, depending on how much you're producing, right? So you might just have a unique number, say 1675. That means it's the 75th lot that was harvested in 2016. And then you would have an inventory sheet that captured all of that other information. What is the variety name? In this case, we have T2. What is its status? 5. That is its variety life cycle status. How much did that lot weigh? 5 kilograms. Okay, so that's how much you're producing. And you, of course, would know T2. Is it a tomato? Is it a carrot? The variety name is something that you would agree on within your business. The year, the location, that's the field that it was grown in, so that you have that information. The seed count per kilogram, that just gives you an idea of how much you have to sell, how many seeds actually you have. Then you would have your germination and purity test. So a purity test would be something that most of us would be getting by a grow out, some kind of whether you're doing that on your farm or whether you're outsourcing that to someone else. You would have a grow out and you would take data on how many off types you see, and that would be how you get your purity. Germination, of course. And then if you look at this, you should have, internally some sort of level of what's acceptable for your purity and germination percents. So in this example, we have a hold on the second variety, on the second lot, 1522. And the reason there's a hold is in the comment. There are off types. So you did a grow out and it only was 82% pure. So you had all of these off types. It's not ready to sell unless you can figure out how to separate those off types out. If you can't, it's potential that you can't sell this seed and you may have to do something else with it, whether that's donating it or whatever. If you look at the lot 1633, that one is also on hold, and that's for germination. So that would have to be brought up. So the question is, can you bring the germ up by resizing the seed, keeping only the larger seed or something like that? Can you bring that germination up to whatever your level is that's acceptable for sale? Finally, if we look at 1722, that is the breeder seed, and it's in status 0. you see here, very small size compared with the rest of the lots. And there might be a comment that just is like, oh, this one's, we're doing trialing. And that would be something that maybe the breeder would enter as a comment. So looking at this kind of goes back to inventory and how it ties up cash. You're having to store this seed at temperature and humidity. You're having to control any disease. You know, did you have to do hot water treatments? Those kinds of things. Insects, you know, you're paying to make sure that you're not having insect infestations. You're keeping animals out in whatever way you can. You're having to retest every time that the seed has, you know, whatever your internal protocol is, but you're going to have to be testing the seed to make sure that it's still germinating, you know, every year at least. So this is just sort of reiterating that. The thing about inventory to remember is that you want to sell your first in, first out, so you sell your oldest seed first because of that decline in germination over time. And something to think about is you have to build this reserve of cash in case you have a crop failure, you have a lot that has too many off types to be able to sell, you have a lot that just isn't selling and you're going to have to deactivate that variety, those kinds of things. So that's the goal of managing your inventory. You always want to sort out errors. If you find something that's an error, figure it out, or you think it might be, because errors in inventory are another way that businesses fail because of inventory management. If you're selling something that you think is maybe this variety, but you're not quite sure because the lot number was wrong or something like that, sort it out, because it's your reputation really that's on the line, and that is worth more than any individual lot. Never put seed in an inventory that doesn't meet your sales specifications. So if you're not going to be able to sell it, it shouldn't be in your inventory. You know, if you know that you're not going to be able to bring that germ up to where it's going to make your minimum requirement for sales, then it shouldn't be in your inventory. There's no reason to pay to store it. Selling out of a variety is not a bad thing. That's something, you know, overproducing a variety to the point where there's no way you're ever going to sell out is not necessarily the best way to manage your business. Selling out of a variety makes people want it, right? I mean, and it lets you know where your production could be. So it's really not a bad thing, but selling poor varieties or bad seed is a bad thing. That reputation takes a long time to get back, and it takes much more than money to do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of about the variety life cycle and managing this inventory. For status 3, 4, and 5, so introduction, new product, and increasing sales, it is okay to build inventory above your sales forecast, but you may not want to produce at, like, you know, 400% or something like that. But you may want to produce at, say, 150%, so that you have a little bit of reserve in case, you know, you don't want to be selling out all the time. It's okay to sell out, but it's also okay to build inventory above sales if you think that you're going to be able to sell that. Maybe not in the first year, but you will be able to. Once you get into stable sales, you really want to just be stocking inventory right at what your forecast is, because at stable sales, you know, the next step is going to be that's going to start declining. And particularly if you have a new variety that's coming behind it or something, then you really want to be trying to market that as your new variety. In declining sales and phasing out, you're really trying to reduce the inventory at this point. You also will be pushing to sell it because you don't want to be storing it any longer. You want to be moving. And then during deactivation, you will be removing, donating, repurposing inventory. Keeping seed that doesn't sell, of course, costs you time, money, maintenance, all of the things that you could be using in other ways. Again, and I said this earlier, but just to reiterate, you want to keep your foundation seed so that it might be revived later. I would really like to thank the USDA Risk Management Agency. This entire day was funded by a grant that we received from them. So you'll see a lot of Risk Management Agency logos today. I would love to take some questions if anybody has them. Go ahead.
So when you're going to sell a seed, do you tell the person you're selling the seed to that it's a 2-year-old seed, or does that not matter as long as the germination rates are good?
As long as it meets the specifications that are either standard across the industry or internally, then it doesn't matter.
So like
because
a 4-year-old
really,
seed, as long as it germinates,
yeah,
it's fine.
Absolutely.
I would just add that vigor usually declines before germination rate does. So it might germ at 90%, but if the vigor is really poor, it's a sign that the germ is going to start dropping. So that's if you can have a vigor test as a part of your germination test, that can help you know the two.
Thanks, Tom.
I would just add to that we've had issues where customers can read our lot number and they can see how old the seed is, and even though the germ is still up at 95% and the vigor tests come back really good, they might complain that the seed, gosh, this was from 2 years ago, I don't want this lot, even though the seed we're dealing with maintains germ for 10 years fairly well. So that's an issue we've had. We've kind of had to move lot numbers around and change how we tag and label things. But, yeah.
Anybody else?
Tom, can you explain a vigor test real quick?
There's a lot more to it than this, but in many cases it's a speed of growth and a rate of growth. So we do vigor tests not routinely, but if in 7 days you have a certain percent of the seeds that have reached a mature seedling stage, let's say it's 80%, that would be a more vigorous lot than if there were only 30% that reached that stage in that time. There's ways of stressing the seed test, colder temperatures, wetter conditions, sand, all sorts of different things to stimulate like a soil crust and the seed having to emerge out of that. And so that's a sign of vigor too. And then there's more complicated ones that are even more fun.
Stage 8, when you're reducing a seed, and you mentioned like pushing that seed at that stage so you don't have leftover inventory. Do you know of techniques that people would often use to push a variety that's declining in general in popularity?
Well, I think, obviously it can be tricky, but that really comes down to whatever your sales team whoever is in charge of sales can do to make sure that you are able to try and because you really don't want to have to just destroy seed that you've spent, because you're already paying for all of these production costs, for all of the overhead of having stored it, for all of these things. So you do want to try and turn it into cash, really, if you know that it's declining. And that's a question, I think, for a salesperson more than me. Sorry.
One thing that we do is we don't want to say the seed is 20% off all of a sudden because it cheapens it in some ways, but we do call customers who've purchased it before and we let them know it's 20% off. We just don't do like a broad thing, like fire sale kind of thing.
I'm wondering a bit more about when you want to deactivate something because you feel that, it's costing you too much in time, space,
resources to keep it going, but you feel that in the right hands and perhaps sometime in the future, somebody may find value in it. And so how you ensure that you get that into the right hands so that it is a seed that remains viable for others to eventually work with, should they have, time or inclination?
Yeah, that's a really interesting conundrum, and I think knowing who might benefit from having it in their hands is really the key. If you're really tied to it and you really believe in the variety or believe that with some work it could go somewhere, then it should be in the hands of a breeder to make that happen, I would say. Whether it's, I worked at the University of Wisconsin as a PhD student, and there we had varieties that had been in a family for 100 years, and then somebody wasn't interested in keeping it, and they had donated to the university, and that variety was being stewarded and worked on by a professor. So that's one method that I know of. I'm sure there are also breeders at companies that would love to look at lots of germplasm. Go ahead.
Actually, I can answer your question. I'm working for USDA. I work for Gene Bank. So I think the Gene Bank is the right place for you to donate, but you have to give up all your right, okay? If you attach any condition to the seed source, we don't accept. We manage the seed to keep for the whole human beings, and we keep them alive for you. And if you are interested, you can request. We send you back for free. Everybody, we treat everybody. Yeah, USDA has a very good plant germplasm system. We have different gene banks, about 30 across the country. Here in Corvallis, there's one, like for the small fruits and the pears. And I'm in Pullman, we have all the legumes, alfalfa and grasses. We accept lots of donations from small city company, from the retired professors from the university. They just give up, that's yours. And it becomes, the government becomes the whole.
Yeah, so that's a really great piece of advice. The USDA has germplasm resources and is willing to accept germplasm.
It seems like I hear about all the time, like from farmers, oh, I just figured out that this was the variety that worked with my system and now it's not available anymore. Like, how do you reconcile the few people who really have loved your variety that now you're wanting to deactivate? Kind of what we've already been talking about.
Yeah, that's something I might defer to either Tom or Pete to talk about a little bit more. But I know
there's a workshop about it.
Yeah.
A whole session. So maybe we'll just pass the buck to whoever's doing that session.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a workshop on Saturday with a bunch of representatives from seed companies who are going to be talking about that exact issue.
Yeah, just to comment on how much inventory to maintain of a good selling variety. I like to see at least a 2-year supply on annuals, but if it's a biennial or perennial, I really like to see more than that, like 3 or more years, because you may not get around to growing it in that amount of time. So just, there is a difference.
Right, and if you have a bad year when you are growing it out, it's that much harder to catch up.
So you, in one of your slides, you mentioned testing, whatever the protocol is for you for testing vigor or germination and purity, you said.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's a change in purity?
No, there shouldn't be a change in purity unless you mixed lots, which you don't want to do ever. That would be the only way that you would have a change in purity. So yeah, your purity should be the same standard.
I've started to see something in the last little while which interests me, and I'm wondering if a few people here in the room can maybe speak to it, which is that a number of seed companies are offering seed that they sort of advertise as, breeder's delights, kind of like when you buy a home and it says a fixer-upper. It's like, we know that there's a lot of variety going on here, and if you want to play, here you go, because we haven't stabilized this yet. And I'm wondering if some of those that are now offering that kind of thing want to talk about how they're doing with it, and where they see the future of that going, as the interest in working with seed seems to be growing.
Might want to respond to
Yeah,
that?
does anybody here do that?
Right.
Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Adaptive Seeds. I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more later. The sales of our diverse gene pools have been pretty good. I think there's interest in it, not necessarily from people that want to continue the material for breeding projects, but just people that want to have a diverse patch to pick from, especially with kales. Those have been doing really well. Tomatillos. There's a lot of crops that uniformity isn't necessarily important to a lot of growers. So we're going to keep on doing more of those, I think.
For like fresh market harvest, a lot of times your breeder's stock that has 3 to 6 week difference in maturity over like a hybrid, that field's gonna be ready to harvest all within the same week. It's gonna be mature and done. You're gonna plow it under, plant something new. For a farmer's market, fresh market style produce farm, like it actually can be a real benefit to have that extended market window, because you're not selling it all in one lot or at once. So yeah.
That's all right. Weaving through.
Tom's getting his workout, running the mic
All
around.
the steps I got today.
Hey, I was curious how common it is for you to try to salvage a variety by kind of resizing the seed or winnowing off some of the light seed, and if so, or if it is common, what's the first steps you take, and if that doesn't work, what's the next step you take?
I'm going to let Tom answer that one.
So any particular seed lot has variation within it of weight, density, size, shape, and color. And so if the germ's at 80% and you needed to get it to 90%, the bag of seed, that germ's at 80%, keep in mind that each seed in there, I know this is overly simplistic, but each seed in there either germinates at 0 or at 100, right? It either grows or it doesn't grow. So when you have a bag of seed that germinates at 80%, what that means is that 20% of the seed in there is dead. And hopefully, if there's variation in size, shape, weight, or density, you can clean it out. So depending on what tools you have, density is usually the most common one, because if you've already cleaned the seed lot, you've gotten rid of most of the light seeds, you've gotten rid of small seeds or things like that. So larger, denser seeds is a very, very simplistic way of thinking about it, but that can help. Sorting seed for density on us without particular equipment for it can be a little bit tricky, but that's one most common technique. A gravity table is the tool that's generally used for that.
In that same vein, when you test a seed for germination, you're using 0 and 100%. But there's some seeds that are going to germinate under totally ideal conditions, but are not going to germinate under less than ideal conditions. And when you germ test in your warehouse or in your laboratory or whatever, you're going to get a different germination rate than somebody's going to get when they throw it out in the soil and it's not the right temperature.
Go ahead.
There are rules for testing seeds that take a lot of this into account. So you can't extend the number of days that the germination test happens forever in hopes that they keep on going. You can't increase the temperature in hopes that it makes it better. And you need to do a seedling evaluation of all of the seedlings. So when we do germination tests, it could be 100% of the seeds come up, but upon closer analysis, you have 10% of them that have no roots. Well, you know, if they germinate because they have a stalk, they've got leaves, but no roots, I'm pretty sure a plant's not going to work in the real world. So if you don't do the seedling evaluation part of the germination test, you're never going to find out those seeds that have damaged parts that don't make them work in the real world. So the seedling evaluation is an essential part of it all. And that helps to mimic the real world kind of environment. But again, if you're selling seed to a particular region or market that is very stressful growing conditions, it's important to have your germination tests go through the same kind of rigor.
So an ethical and business question that I often struggle with as a seed producer, over and over we've heard don't mix lots, which makes a lot of sense, especially when you're working at a large scale. But if you're working at a smaller scale, and you have different lots and you have a contract, let's say with a minimum germination of 85% that's required for this crop, and I have 2 lots, it's really hard not to mix those 2 lots to get, if I have one lot that's 80% germ and one lot that's 95% germ, sometimes I struggle with figuring out what the incentive is for me as a producer to give that seed company my best, just my best lot, and get rid of that 80% germ lot. I do it because I know it's the right thing to do, but I'm not sure if there are mechanisms in place that some seed companies use to ensure that there is an incentive to the grower to actually give you their best stuff and not salt the bag with lower germing lots.
Yeah, it's not totally against the rules to blend lots when you have, you know, when you know that when you're blending them, in the end, you're going to have a good rate of germ and it's going to be quality seed. You know, both are quality products going in and they're genetically identical or similar, right? What you're looking at is traceability to the field. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you're basing your lot system on this was grown here and that was grown there, then you lose that when you blend. And that's I think a business decision if you want to do that or not, because there is some risk involved in that. If you have a quality issue with a customer who bought it and they want to know, and you have to trace something back, a disease issue or something, then you lose that. But so how, as someone who's buying the seed from a producer, would you prefer to be the person mixing the lot on the business, on the contracted side, as opposed to the producer side? We generally don't get into the weeds on, like, obviously we want to know a lot about what seed we're bringing in as much as we can, but there's a certain expectation that there's information we're not going to know. Like one that's a real bummer sometimes is whether if it's a brassica, was it hot water treated or not? Oftentimes they won't tell us that. They'll simply say it germs at the rate that you desire, and here it is. And then whether or not it's blended, we would like to know that, but there's no expectation that we would know it. It is a benefit for us to receive a smaller number of lots, because if you have 10 lots of a tomato, then that's 10 different lots that you have to test. And if it's expensive seed, every test is, you know, what's the word I'm thinking of? Not exhaustive, but destructive, right? So you're burning through a lot of seed. So, but again, that traceability is a big thing. And, you know, if there's enough distinguishing characteristics between the 2 lots that you feel like they should be kept separate, they should be kept separate. But I think it's a judgment call. And you just have to understand what the implications are, really. So
I think, would you say that then is on an individual? Do you think you should have kind of a gentleman's agreement with whoever is buying your seed?
Well, what we've done, we just ran into this where we bought some really pricey greenhouse tomato seed, and it came in a whole bunch of lots. And we sit down with, we're not going to blend them because they were different enough, and for a pricey product, we didn't feel like that's appropriate. But we do sit down with the vendor and say, hey, this is adding a lot to our cost of doing business, so we'd prefer that you can figure this out to give us one lot. And if they're going to blend it, it depends on the relationship, what we know about them, if it's something we trust them to do.
Right.
But blending lots is not uncommon. It's just, you need to be aware of the potential pitfalls with it. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, she needs the mic, Pete.
I think the secondary question to what was being asked there is, when seed companies are creating these contracts with the growers, are there considerations towards incentivizing seed that germs at a higher rate versus just at that industry standard? And how can that be reflected in the contract and how it's written out?
A quick comment on the blending, and then I can answer that one from our perspective. From the seed company perspective, we would always want to be the ones making the choice about blending any lots. There is a whole complicated group of issues around it. For example, if it's 2 lots of the same variety from your farm, both from the same stock seed, and blending those, that's a very different scenario than blending it from your farm and then from another batch from Chile. A different year, different grower, different nation. There's a lot of issues with that. To the point of the expensive seed coming in a lot of packages that say it's all from different lots, we've had the same issue sometimes. So we go back to that supplier and say, will you help us understand your lot codes? Because in many cases it's the same mother lot that it comes from, but they've packaged it on different days. And so they have a designation on their lot code that's related to the batch for the packaging of it. So they can track what day it was packaged on or what facility, but it's all from the same crop. So that's helpful. On our contracts, we give a 5% bonus, financial bonus, or a 10% financial bonus for seed lots that germ at 5% above or 10% above the standard percent on the contract. So if the standard is 85% and the seed comes back at 90%, the grower gets 5% bonus on that. So we absolutely want to incentivize exceptional quality.
I was just going to follow up on that as well. We actually have in our contracts, if it germs below, I think like our standard is 80 and 85% for the crops I work in. And if it's below, I think like 5 or 10% under that, we in our contract won't pay the grower for it. We can do anyways because we love our growers, but there is a little safety net in our contracts for that because we can't sell it. And if it's germing at 70%, it's really hard to blend it and get it back up over that 80, 85%. And so for us, I mean, it costs so much to produce it. We pay the grower, and then we have to cull it out and feed it to the pigs. So.
Okay, well, I think we'll take a 15-minute break. Everyone get some coffee and come back, and we will hear about different scales for marketing.